On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
There's a couple things that I think I attribute to my mental shift and the improvement in my outlook. One, to be honest, was the Obama campaign. I was incredibly inspired by the Obama campaign. That campaign, of course, is associated, with one of the main themes was hope. It was a theme, I think most people would agree, whether you agree with Obama's policies or not, it was about optimism and hope. And that's what I needed at that point in my life. So I think it spoke to me. The other thing was my nephew was born in March of 2007. And I was living with my sister, so I got to be there during her pregnancy, during his birth. And it's hard not to have a lot of joy when you're around a newborn. So I attribute my my nephew's birth and Barack Obama to my recovery.
Shannon Binns is the founder and executive director of Sustain Charlotte, a nonprofit organization helping to advance the long-term social, economic, and environmental health of the Charlotte region. Prior to launching Sustain Charlotte in 2010, Shannon worked at the Nature Conservancy in Washington, D.C., where he was part of their climate change science and policy team. He has also served as an agroforestry volunteer with the Peace Corps in Senegal, helping found a tsunami relief organization in Thailand, and served communities across the Northeast as a member of AmeriCorps. In the private sector, Shannon has worked as an industrial engineer for Motorola, General Motors, and Trane. In this episode, we explore sustainability, smart growth, and a life of humanitarian work and service. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Shannon, welcome.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you. What is Sustain Charlotte?
Sustain Charlotte is a nonprofit that is really trying to bring members of the community together to move Charlotte forward in a different way, to grow in a different way than we've grown for the last several decades at least, and really grow in a way that's conscious of the long-term impacts of decisions we make today with regard to the economy, the environment, and issues of equity and so other social issues.
How have you defined your mission?
Well, our mission statement is to inspire choices that lead to a healthy, vibrant, equitable community for generations to come.
And how are you doing your work?
Well, we're always looking for ways that we can, per our mission statement, inspire people. And so we think that inspiring people is really a product of informing them and engaging them and really helping them see possibility and making these other ways of doing things attractive, right? So a lot of times, it's about explaining the benefits of a particular behavior or course of action or decision. And sometimes it's just making things fun. So we try to do a combination of things. Our work is really kind of put it into one of four categories. We do a number of programs, which are sort of longer term, usually a year or more activities. Typically, we partner with a neighborhood and we help them achieve a goal related to improving the sustainability and quality of life in their neighborhood. So that's just an example, I would say, of a longer term, initiative or program. We do a whole bunch of events, and this is really about, we find it's, when you can get in person with people, it's a lot easier to connect and to inspire and to inform. And so we do a monthly series that we call Grow Smart Charlotte, where we look at a different issue that's being impacted by our growth, and how we have a panel of experts who talk about that issue and really focus on solutions. We do a couple of major events, one in the spring. We've done seven years in a row. It's called the Charlotte Sustainability Awards. And the purpose there, again, is to inspire. So we lift up leaders across all sectors, all types of organizations, nonprofits, businesses, government agencies, and so forth, and really try to inspire other organizations to do what they're doing to move us forward on the sustainability front. So that's one of our longest standing events. And then an event we've done 3 years now is called Biketoberfest, and that's a fun event. That's an example of how we try to help people just have fun and as a way of doing something different. But really the goal of that event is to help people see just how fun and easy it is to get around certain parts of our city by bicycle. A lot of people don't think of the bicycle as a form of transportation. It's more of thought of as a recreational activity in Charlotte. So we put together a really safe and fun route where people can visit 25 to 30 different destinations, businesses, parks, and so forth, museums, by bike in a single afternoon and have fun doing it. And the hope there is that we inspire people to think about using their bike to get to some of those places instead of getting in their car. Those are two of the areas. A third area that we work in is really the large number of communications that we put out, that we publish. So we do a weekly newsletter that we spend really a lot of time putting together to keep people informed and share opportunities for them to get engaged in plans or decisions that are pending or being considered. We also have a very active blog. So we generate, original content for our blog. We've written over 40 articles for our blog so far this year. A lot of those articles are really reporting on what is happening in local government. We attend all of the City Council's Environment Committee meetings and report on those, as well as the City Council's Transportation and Planning Committee meetings. And these are meetings where decisions are being made. It's where a lot of the work gets done in terms of city policy, but the mainstream media very rarely covers these meetings unless there's something controversial, which isn't that often. So we really try to report out, what's happening so people can be informed and be involved in those processes and those policies, which is a good maybe segue to our fourth area, which is policy advocacy. Through some of the means I've already mentioned, through our newsletter and social media and at our events, we really try to keep people informed of developments that affect the sustainability of our city on the public policy front. Because at the end of the day, because we're a democracy, right? Public policy is really made by those who show up. Historically, particularly at the local level, not a lot of people get engaged at the local government level, but it's where we can have the most impact, and it's where the decisions being made have the most impact on our individual lives. So we really help people to know when can they weigh in. Most people don't have the time to follow what's happening with City Council. So if there's a public hearing on an issue or a vote about to take place, we let people know, hey, this is your chance to let your elected officials know how you feel about that issue. And I think that's, for a lot of people, that's one of the most beneficial things that we do.
Shannon, your organization is called Sustain Charlotte. Sustainability means different things to different people. Yeah. What does it mean to you?
Well, for us, sustainability is about taking a holistic approach to decision-making in Charlotte, and really, instead of looking at issues as separated from one another and trying to decide, is this an economic development issue, or is this a transportation issue, or is this an environmental issue? We really try to point out that most issues have all of those aspects to them. And so, we really subscribe to the definition of sustainability that looks at meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the ability to meet our needs in the future. And it really looks at issues of social equity, issues of the economy, and issues of the environment. So this is often referred to as the 3 E's, or in business parlance, the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. So that's really, the definition of sustainability that we subscribe to. But again, it's looking holistically at issues and understanding how they're connected to one another.
Should any one of those forms take priority over the other?
Well, I think I think they sometimes are seen as in tension with each other in the short term. The problem is our society, our government, our economy is really set up to think short term. We think in terms of quarterly profits, annual reports, 2 or 4 year election cycles. But sustainability really requires us to take a long-term view. So when we look over the course of years, decades, I actually believe most of the things we can do that are sustainable are good for the economy, good for equity, and good for the environment. So I think, unfortunately, they are often seen in tension when you look over a short time horizon, but that's rarely the case when you look over a longer time horizon. And I can just give you an example. If we say, well, it's going to cost us more money today to, say, invest in a transit system or invest in renewable energy. Yes, in the course of a year or two, that's more expensive than continuing to drive cars that are fueled by fossil fuel, or continuing to have an electricity grid fueled by fossil fuels. But over the course of time, over decades, there's a return on those investments where we actually start saving money. We have improvements to our health. There's all kinds of benefits that accrue over time, but we often make decisions based on these very short time horizons instead of the longer horizon.
You mentioned this definition of sustainability, that development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the future. Isn't an unregulated free market the best way to ensure the meeting of present and future needs?
Not at all. An unregulated free market doesn't take into account any of the things we've just been talking about. It doesn't think about long-term consequences. It thinks about immediate return on investment. And so it also doesn't take into account most social and environmental issues. It only takes into account the values that are those things that have been monetized in the marketplace. Things like equity, fairness, gender equality, environmental health, public health. None of those things have monetary value in the market. So those things are not priced. And so we don't see the true costs of decisions often aren't taken into account. The role of regulation is to put value on those things and require businesses take those into account. So regulation plays a very important part in a market economy, and I think we can see examples of that in our economy, but other free market economies as well.
Do you see regulation as really the only way to price those externalities back into the market?
Well, there is a field called environmental economics where economists have been trying to determine how we can monetize the environmental costs and benefits of our decisions. That is a growing field within the economics field. But, I obviously we're not there yet. But we have. A good example, we have several countries and now we have several states who have put a price on carbon. The idea of taxing carbon or having a cap and trade system for particular pollutants, whether it be carbon dioxide or sulfur dioxide, those systems do exist, and that is one attempt to monetize the environmental costs of decisions that we make or fuels that we consume. So that's already happening to some degree. I think most folks would agree we don't put a cost on all environmental impacts, but there's certainly a lot of work being done to figure out how we can do that.
Another term you use is smart growth. What is smart growth?
Smart growth is a term that refers to really a type of urban planning, really thinking, again, long-term about the growth of your city and how you're expected to grow and making really thoughtful decisions about that growth. It also entails making sure that the way you build your city allows people to easily get to the places they need to go without having to get into a car and drive long distances. So smart growth is really about more compact, walkable, transit-friendly, bike-friendly development. Those are also ingredients in smart growth.
Shannon, there's a lot of innovation that is occurring both in the urban landscape and in personal mobility.
Yeah.
Where do you see that going?
Well, I think there's no doubt that we've seen, in Charlotte, many other cities, a real change in how we get around at the individual level. For short distances, we're seeing an increase in Charlotte around people biking. And now with the arrival of a couple scooters who offer electric scooters, we've seen a lot more people using a scooter to cover those short distances as well. And so, this is something that is being talked about in urban planning and transportation circles nationwide. No one exactly knows where this is going to end up, but certainly there's a major revolution happening around transportation right now, and it's exciting.
What are the costs and benefits of this kind of innovation that's occurring?
Yeah, I think I'll start with benefits. Certainly, if someone can, use one of these new forms of transportation instead of having to get into a car, right? That's going to personally benefit them in the sense that these are much less expensive modes of travel. They may be able to get by without a car, or maybe if they're in a multi-car household, they can get by with fewer cars, so they can save money on insurance and car payments and parking and gas and all the things that come with owning a car. There's also the benefit to cities of having to build less parking. Parking has it's one of these things we don't think about much. Parking really shapes the way a city looks, right? And how pleasant that city is to walk around in is really shaped by how much of our land we dedicate to parking. So one of the things a lot of urban planners are excited about is how these changes in mobility might reduce the need to build massive parking garages and parking lots and so forth. So that's another benefit, I think, to these changes. I think in terms of costs, I think really there's one concern. There's been some research done lately. I think there was a little bit of a wishful thinking around driverless cars perhaps solving all of our transportation woes. They would eliminate traffic fatalities, and they would eliminate, make just traffic move more efficiently. But what some newer thinking around that is, and there's some research to support this, is driverless cars might also increase congestion, might increase traffic because more people choose to use that mode. And if people are continuing to be sort of one person per vehicle, that doesn't really help us on the congestion front, right? We're still moving the same number of vehicles. So I think the caveat there, the thing we have to be careful about is, how can we maximize the benefits and without worsening traffic? So that's one of the considerations.
Shannon, if the benefits of sustainability and smart growth are so obvious, why is your organization even necessary?
Well, I think because it's necessary because change is hard, and doing things different is hard. That's I think just part of human nature. I think there's also, again, a tendency to think in terms of what has worked, what have we been doing in the past. Doing something new is different and challenging. And there's also that short-term versus long-term thinking. I think there's folks who have maybe their whole lives, they're part of their culture and identity is driving a car. That's been a big part of the American culture for a long time. That's changing, with younger generations being less interested in driving. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the people who are still making decisions and voting, they like to drive. And so, that's one of the challenges is just, sort of the culture, which doesn't change overnight. And then, of course, as we talked about earlier, some of these things have some upfront costs that are harder for some folks to stomach. So transitioning, for example, our transportation system away from an auto-based system to these other modes of transportation we're talking about has some costs. We've invested trillions of dollars in making it safe and convenient to drive. And now we're talking about making big investments in these other modes. And, that's not easy for some folks to do. So I think it's just one of these things where there's new thinking it always comes with growing pains and with challenges. And so, that's what we're up against.
Maybe you're up against it because most people want to drive their cars and live in single-family homes in the suburbs.
I don't think that's true. I think most people do want this. Our organization has broad support. We have support generally amongst not only elected officials, but the public. We see that growing every year. What's interesting is, very few things we do actually are controversial in Charlotte. I would say what we do is less controversial than things a lot of other organizations do. I think we talk about wanting to improve the quality of life for people who live here. It's pretty apple pie for a lot of people. Most people hate sitting in traffic. And so when we say, look, we're trying to make it so you don't have to sit in traffic as long, most people like that idea. Certainly there's some people who don't agree with us. There's no doubt about that. But, again, that's just part of living in a democracy. We have a lot of disagreements on just about every issue, but in this country. But I think generally speaking, most people living here in Charlotte think that what we're doing is really important to their lives as well as the lives of future generations.
The city of Charlotte recently unanimously passed a resolution to become a low-carbon city by 2050. What is a low-carbon city?
Yeah, so low-carbon city is a term that essentially refers to, reducing the carbon footprint per person. Is really how that's measured. And so, this is a term that, is being used around the world. So there's actually over 9,000 cities worldwide who have committed through the what's called the Mayor's Covenant on climate change to become low carbon cities. And so Charlotte is maybe, city number 9,217 or something to make that commitment as well. But it's really about trying to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, which of course are the primary contributor to climate change, and moving away to alternatives to fossil fuels to become, quote, a low carbon city.
The resolution uses language that the city will strive to become low carbon and strive to source 100% of its energy use from zero carbon sources. Does the strive language make the resolution meaningless?
Doesn't make it meaningless. I mean, it's not regulation. It's not, the city passes a lot of resolutions like this. Most of them don't get near the attention that this one got, but resolutions generally by nature are symbolic, but that doesn't mean that the symbolism is meaningless. I think it is important that there are concrete action plans and budget allocations that follow when a resolution like this is made. And, it's yet to be seen exactly whether that will happen or not. And in fact, Councilmember Driggs, when he voted in support, because I think it's noteworthy that this was unanimously supported by Democrats and Republicans, something we don't see a lot of these days in our country. He made the note, hey, I'm with you today on this aspirational goal, but I may not be with you when it comes to the costs involved in making this a reality. So he acknowledged that. So yes, there will be much tougher decisions down the road about the investments that we'll need to make and the decisions we'll need to make and the trade-offs that involves down the road. And so we'll have to, all of us who would like to become a low carbon city, which I think is probably the majority of Charlotteans, will have to remain vigilant and be willing to tell our elected officials who make those decisions, hey, we're with you and we support you and we'll reelect you if you make those decisions.
Shannon, Sustain Charlotte is 8 years into its work. What's on your mind as the leader of the organization these days?
It's exciting that, we've been in a sort of toddler and then maybe early adolescent phase, like any organization, for most of these 8 years. We're finally, I think, maturing to the point where, we have enough resources and a large enough team that we can really have an impact. And we're really seeing the impacts of our work more and more every day. We are getting asked for our opinion by thought leaders in the community, the media. Very often, I think in the last week, we've been quoted or interviewed by the media 5 or 6 times alone. And so that's really exciting. And of course, with that, let's say, elevated platform or bigger megaphone, however you want to put it, comes a responsibility. And so it's always, I think, thinking about how can we leverage this in the most positive way for the benefit of the most people.
Shannon, I'd like to talk about you and why you care about these issues. You grew up in the Midwest. What was your childhood like?
I had a fantastic childhood in many ways. I had a lot of freedom to just run around the neighborhood. There was woods across the street, cornfield across the street, literally. I played in the creeks and I played baseball in the neighbor's yard, and I biked to school, and it was great. Iowa, where I'm from, is sort of notorious for being a great place to raise a family, and so I think it certainly was for me. I was fortunate. I grew up with a mom and a dad and a sister, and my mom and dad had their differences, and ended up divorcing when I went into college, and separating while I was in high school. So things could have been a little bit rosier on the home front, I guess you could say, but I certainly had it better than a lot of people, I think. Yeah, so my mom worked away from home some of the time growing up. She worked at a local fabric store for a while, and she also worked for a local photographer later when I was in high school. But, a lot of her responsibility was maintaining our household and our family. She was a stay-at-home mom for some of those years, bringing us up. My dad was in the family business. My grandfather had started business that was largely an explosives business. It was called Binns and Stevens Explosives. So he and his partner, my last name being Binns, the Stevens was the other half, had an explosives business where they sold explosives to mainly rock quarries to mine for things like lime in Missouri and southern Iowa primarily, which is quite ironic in many ways. I'm grateful in many ways that I didn't have the pressure of continuing the family business. That was not asked of me. We actually sold the business before I was at the point of maybe continuing it. But yes, it's ironic because certainly explosives don't do nature any favors. So in some ways I joke and say I'm trying to right the wrongs of maybe previous family generations, although, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Who were you at your best as a teenager?
Let's see. I guess I was at my best. I was going to say at school, but that's not really true. I was kind of a troublemaker in school, but I guess I was at my best in the when it came time to do the test. I was a pretty good student. I got good grades. I was into sports, and I played a lot of different sports when I was growing up as well. Got into local, school government a little bit. But generally speaking, at least when in my younger years, elementary and junior high, I was kind of a troublemaker because I talked a lot in class. Generally that didn't go over very well with the teachers.
Shannon, how are you a troublemaker, and are you still a troublemaker today?
Yeah, I guess it depends on your point of view. Troublemaker is I use that word myself, but that's maybe a more negative way to look at it. I am still a very independent thinker. Let me say that, and I certainly don't accept the status quo at face value. I really try to understand an issue, and if I don't understand, I'll ask, and if I don't agree, I'll speak up about it. And I think maybe that was reflected in my childhood. The trouble that I got into was largely because I didn't always follow the rules, but I also didn't always agree with those rules, I guess. The idea of sort of sitting quietly for hours at a time and not talking to the person next to me was a rule that I had a hard time with. And I don't know, maybe I just should have gone to more of a Montessori school or a school that had a different philosophy about that. But I went to a public school that was doing things sort of in the standard way. And I think I didn't fit well in that particular model.
You went to Iowa State University.
Mm-hmm.
What did you study?
At Iowa State, I studied industrial engineering. I went straight into college after high school, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have enough, I think, world experience to really understand what my options are and what I was passionate about. I really only went for a couple of reasons. My best friend's dad was a chemical engineer, and he's somebody that I admired and, looked up to in many ways. And then my high school chemistry teacher told me one day he thought I would make a good engineer because I thought like an engineer. So that was really the basis of my decision to go to engineering school, which in retrospect wasn't the best basis. So I retired from engineering fairly young.
You did go to work at Motorola as an engineer in Schaumburg, Illinois, but you didn't stay very long.
No. Well, I started to lose interest in the field of engineering actually while I was still in engineering school. The main thing that happened was when I was a junior at Iowa State, I took a semester abroad over in Wales at the University of Swansea, and I wasn't allowed to take any engineering classes, or I should say they wouldn't be, transferred back. So I started taking classes that I couldn't take at Iowa State, which were basically social science and humanities classes. I took a politics class, I took a sociology class, and these classes were infinitely more interesting to me than the 4 semesters of calculus and physics and chemistry that I had under my belt at that point. So really it was that junior year that I thought, gosh, I don't really want to be an engineer. I want to do something in politics or the social sciences. But I was already pretty well into my degree at that point. So I finished it, gave it a go for a year at Motorola, but my heart was never really into it after that time abroad.
Shannon, you then started traveling the world and doing human services work, which was quite a transition.
Yeah. Yeah, I left Motorola to go get a certificate to teach English as a foreign language over in Prague because I'd visited Prague when I lived in Wales and fell in love with the city and the culture and knew that if I went over there, I could teach English and gain employment. And so it was really teaching English was just really a way to get back to the social sciences a little bit, get away from the hard sciences of math and chemistry and physics and do something with language again because I loved, I always loved reading. I loved writing, and teaching English seemed to be like it would give me an opportunity to get back to those things while also giving me the opportunity to live abroad.
You did live abroad in the Czech Republic teaching English, and then you spent a year in the AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps. What was that about?
Yeah, so I learned about the National Civilian Community Corps on a plane when I was living in Prague, coming back to the U.S. That happened right after 9/11. So like many Americans, 9/11 had a big impact on my life. I, like many people, was looking for ways, I think, to kind of give back to my country. So when I learned about AmeriCorps, I thought, hey, this looks like a great opportunity for me to move back to the U.S. and give back to my country and be a part of that.
And what work did you actually do for the AmeriCorps?
Yeah, so the National Civilian Community Corps is a really unique program. It's for young people who are ages 18 to 25. They put you in on a team with about a dozen other 18 to 25 year olds. They give you a 15 passenger van. They assign you to a region of the country. I was assigned to the Northeast, the 10 state region. And then every 2 to 8 weeks, you do a different project with a nonprofit or a government agency in those 10 states. So I did everything from disaster relief with the Red Cross, hurricane relief, which was not in the Northeast, of course. That was down in Louisiana and Texas. But we worked in inner city schools for several weeks, helping mentor some kids in East Baltimore. We helped clear fallen debris from a river in Connecticut to make it passable for boats. So I just did all kinds of things. But I will say what I took away from that time was this understanding of some of the social and environmental challenges we have in our country that I was completely oblivious to up to that point. So I got the bug, I guess, to the awareness of those social and environmental issues through AmeriCorps, and just the bug to do service, to do community service and give back.
You then joined the Peace Corps and you went to Senegal.
Yeah. So Peace Corps was really, I think, an extension of AmeriCorps for me in many ways. I wanted to continue service, serving in a public way. But I also wasn't done living abroad. I wasn't done seeing the world. I missed that. And so Peace Corps kind of allowed me to live abroad, experience a very different culture, the culture of Senegal in my case, and still feel like I was giving to something bigger than myself.
You were not done. You then moved to Thailand and worked for 5 months doing tsunami relief.
Yeah. So another example, I think, of an opportunity that came along after the disaster there in Southeast Asia to go abroad again, another part of the world I'd never been to, but not be completely selfish about it. Get to see another part of the world and live in another part of the world while also doing humanitarian work.
While you were there overseas doing this work, what was on your mind? How were you doing emotionally?
Yeah. Peace Corps was very difficult. I mean, of those experiences, Peace Corps, I was very isolated, not only from, my culture, but it was a very different climate. I was in a Sahelian country. I mean, it was 100 degrees year round, and there's no air conditioning in the village that I was living in. So I think, it was difficult for me emotionally to be at that age in my life and not be able to, I think I missed the social network that most 20-somethings want. I was missing, I was missing a girl who I'd been seeing prior to that. So that was very challenging as well. But it was also challenging emotionally because I didn't, Peace Corps, we often, I think as Americans, we idealize it. We think that it's something different than it really is. And I thought I would make these enormous impacts. And I came to realize I might have been doing more harm than good. I felt like I was maybe perpetuating the reliance of the Senegalese people on American handouts in many ways. And that didn't sit well with me. So I decided if I wanted to do good, I could probably do a lot more good coming back to my own country and trying to reduce the impacts on climate change, which was something that was being seen and felt across Senegal.
After Senegal and after Thailand, you did return to the United States and you moved to New York. Mm-hmm. And you began to work for the Earth Institute at Columbia University while earning a Master's of Public Administration at Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened was I read a book while I was in Thailand called The End of Poverty by Jeff Sachs, who was the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia. The Earth Institute also had a program called the Masters of Public Administration and Environmental Science and Policy that was all under Jeff Sachs's direction. So I was so impressed with his thinking in End of Poverty, I decided I wanted to study, in his program. So that's what led me to Columbia. And I also had decided at that point I really wanted to do, meaningful environmental work. And that seemed like a great opportunity to do that.
Were there other works that influenced your thinking at this time?
Yeah, probably the most influential book at that time in my life, a few years earlier, while I was in AmeriCorps, someone handed me a copy of a book called Earthen Mind by an Oberlin College professor named David Orr. And this was a collection of essays he had written, beautifully written, about really the problem of our educational system in terms of how that was not preparing people for an understanding of how everything we do, our entire economy is dependent on the environment. And so, it made a lot of sense to me. And I really decided after reading that book, I was going to commit my life to environmental education and helping people understand what I now felt I understood after reading that book.
Shannon, after Columbia, you moved to Charlotte. What brought you to Charlotte?
Well, I was going through actually probably the lowest point in my life, to be honest. When I was finishing graduate school, I turned 30 years old a month before I graduated. My girlfriend was going to be moving back to Bogota. She was finishing graduate school as well. So 30 hit me hard. I was 30 years old. I didn't have a job. I had a lot of student debt from graduate school. And my girlfriend was moving back to her country. So I became clinically depressed. I started getting professional help. And I really was at a point where I was paralyzed, by fear and by my depression. And so I had family, my sister, Sarah, here in Charlotte. And I thought, gosh, I really need to live close to her and that support network that only sisters can provide, right? Or siblings can provide. So that's what brought me to Charlotte.
And in fact, you lived on her couch for a while.
I lived on her couch. Yeah. In fact, a funny story, the couch was a little bit uncomfortable, as you can imagine. So my sister was renting apartments. She rented apartments at the time. And sometimes I would spend the night in the apartment model that she would show during the day. So I would sleep in the model and then I would make the bed and she would show that apartment to people during the day. So yeah, it was a difficult time.
What were those days like?
I started looking for a job, which was very difficult because I didn't have any confidence. That's when you're depressed, you have really zero self-confidence. And so it was a tough time to look for a job, but somehow, by some miracle, I was able to muster enough confidence to interview for a job, which allowed me to work from home, but for a nonprofit, doing work that I was very passionate about. But it was a struggle. It was a real struggle to get out of bed every day, do this work. I don't think I would have been able to do it had I had to go to an office every day, but I was fortunate that I was able to work from home. But I can talk about what changed for me. So there's a couple things that I think I attribute to my mental shift and the improvement in my outlook. One, to be honest, was the Obama campaign. I was incredibly inspired by the Obama campaign. That campaign, of course, is associated, with one of the main themes was hope. It was that theme. I think most people would agree, whether you agree with Obama's policies or not. It was about optimism and hope. And that's what I needed at that point in my life. So I think it spoke to me. The other thing was my nephew was born in March of 2007. And I was living with my sister, so I got to be there during her pregnancy, during his birth. And it's hard not to have a lot of joy when you're around a newborn. So I attribute my nephew's birth and Barack Obama to my recovery.
How did Sustain Charlotte come about?
Yeah, so after I had kind of got to that better place mentally, that was kind of fall of 2007, I read an article in the Observer about the loss of Charlotte's tree canopy due to development and the way we were growing. And I was shocked by it was double digit decrease, something like a 25% decrease in like barely a decade. And I started asking, where's the organization that's trying to shape the way Charlotte grows, and so that we don't continue to decimate our tree canopy, which is something I know I knew at that point was very close to many Charlotteans' hearts. And also, I was going out a lot socially, and I would meet people all the time who were very unhappy with the way Charlotte was growing. I felt like no matter what event I went to, I would run into people who were just really unhappy with the way their neighborhood was changing or the lack of transportation. I had moved to Charlotte having not owned a car for 10 years, and I was struggling with the fact that I had to buy a car. I couldn't walk, bike, ride transit. So all those things kind of came together, and I thought, well, maybe if I just organize, I'm going to do an initiative called the Citizens for Smarter Growth, and I'm going to bring all these citizens who are unhappy with the way Charlotte's growing together to have a stronger collective voice. So that was really the genesis of Sustain Charlotte. I just didn't use the name. I obviously changed the name. Or I should say, I was inspired to start Sustain Charlotte and make it more than a citizens initiative by Sustainable Atlanta. So I was doing an environmental leadership course At the time, I met the deputy director of Sustainable Atlanta, learned about what they were doing down in Atlanta to bring people together to think more holistically about Atlanta's future from that long-term sustainability perspective. And I thought, maybe we could use something like this in Charlotte. So I started interviewing people and asking them if they thought we needed something like that in Charlotte. I interviewed elected officials. I interviewed other nonprofit leaders, business leaders. Everyone said we desperately need a sustained Charlotte. So I decided to give it a go.
How do you emotionally manage the good that you want to do in the world and the impacts that you want to have and the realities that you have to manage when those impacts do not happen or you have unforeseen negative consequences?
Well, I guess now I've been doing it so long, it's probably second nature to me in the sense that I don't think about that. I guess it's part and parcel with the work. I have been, trying to create social change for quite a while now, most of my, let's say, adult life. And I think I'm inherently an optimistic person, which probably helps. And also, I guess I see we have enough wins that those counteract any of the losses. But I will say, in all honesty, working at the local level on these kinds of issues is very rewarding because it's very different than, working on issues at the federal level. We can make things, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're really talking about improving the quality of life. And that's not very controversial, believe it or not. So we don't talk a lot about, sort of the more controversial aspects of our work. We really try to focus on how this is good for people's pocketbooks, how it's good for their health, how it's good for the things they really care about. And I think that has led to us having a lot of wins.
Shannon, why do you do this work?
I don't know. I think that, like I said earlier, I wouldn't be doing this work, I will say, if it wasn't for that AmeriCorps experience. I think what we do is we are very much a product of our childhood and the things that happened to us in life. I was lucky, I guess you could say, that I had a chance to do an AmeriCorps program that gave me a taste of service. And that's just a little bit of serendipity. In terms of the focus I have on sustainability, again, that was driven not only by AmeriCorps, but different, the book I read, Earthen Mind. So, I think after I read Earthen Mind, it became so clear to me this was the work I needed to do. Everything else seemed to pale in comparison. It didn't seem like I could have this knowledge and not do something with it.
Shannon, who is Crystal Tiara?
So Crystal is my wife of 8 years. And of course, more than that, like any wife, she's also my confidant and my wiser self on most days. Again, it feels cliche to say this, but she's my best friend. And she hears a lot about, she probably hears too much about the challenges that I face, but she is an amazing, she's an amazing listener. And yeah, it's listening isn't always my strength. And I think she's been good for me in that regard. I think she reminds me that it's as important to listen as it is to talk. And she also reminds me that, you don't always have to be striving for more. I work a lot less since meeting Crystal. She has reminded me that there is other things in life besides trying to make the world a better place, that there are simple joys to be found in things to be grateful for. So yeah, I think she's been very good for me from a mental and emotional, physical health perspective. On a lighter note, when we got married, there was she made it very clear in her very understated way that it wasn't okay to stay on the computer all night. When she got home from work, when she got home from the office, I needed to disconnect. And that was hard for me at first, of course, because I was used to kind of just working all the time. And, for me, there was no separation between work and everything else. But there is now, and I have her to thank for that. And I'm very grateful for that.
And who is Eadie Binns?
So Eadie is our 2-year-old daughter who, we had to wait a while for her. She came a little later. Crystal and I got married a little later in life than some folks. And then it took us a little while to bring her into the world. We actually... It didn't look like it was going to happen for us to have our own children. So I know, Mark, you and I are Facebook friends, and you see that I post a lot of photos of my daughter. And I think that, that's reflective of the fact that obviously she's important to me, but, children, family's important to me. And I guess when there's a point when you think you may not have that, it's hard not to be grateful. So I think my constant posting of pictures of my daughter is a reflection of my gratitude and love for her, but on maybe a lighter note, photography is a passion of mine as well. And I used to do a lot more of that. That was sort of my creative outlet for a few years prior to Sustain Charlotte. So I think I use photos of my family as a creative outlet as well.
Shannon, when you think back on your life one day, what do you want it to be about?
I want it to be about meaning, I wrote down when I was in college, several values, and I carry those in my wallet. And I don't know if I know them all by memory, but I think I know a few. One was integrity. Integrity is really important to me, and I try to live with integrity, with my word and my deeds. Compassion was another one of the values that I wrote down, and so I try to hold that and see the perspective of others who aren't as fortunate as I am. I should know these by heart because I've been carrying it in my wallet, this little shred of paper, believe it or not, since I was probably 20 or 21. But anyway, whether I can I can't come up with all of them off the top of my head, I think those have become part of who I am, and maybe they always were. But compassion and integrity, and I think that it was instilled in me at an early age that there's a strong sense of right and wrong, at least according to my own moral code. I try to honor that, and I don't know if sometimes maybe it's too much. So I think that's where the balance of Crystal reminding me that, hey, you don't always have to be working to make the world a more just place. Sort of strong sense of duty doesn't have to be on all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just watch a movie and enjoy that. I say that just to say that in addition to this more heavy wanting my life to have purpose, I think I also want my life to be, I want to be remembered as someone who was good to their family. Yeah.
Thanks for your time today, Shannon.
Thank you. I appreciate yours.
Shannon Binns is the founder and executive director of Sustain Charlotte. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Iowa State University and a Master of Public Administration in Environmental Science and Policy from Columbia University. And now, a personal word. The first time I saw Shannon Binns, he was holding an audience spellbound. We were at a Civic by Design forum hosted by architect Tom Lowe. Civic by Design hosts regular conversations at the Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte about civic design issues shaping the city's history. The mission of Civic by Design is to elevate the quality of the built environment and to promote public participation in the creation of a more beautiful and functional region for all. Conversation the night I saw Shannon had something to do with preserving the natural ecosystem in Charlotte. A panel of experts at the front of the room presented PowerPoint slides on the changing landscape. Or at least I think they did. My memory is hazy on the point. What I do remember clearly is this. During Q&A, Shannon Binns stood up, took a microphone in his hands, introduced himself as someone new to the city, offered comments on the declining rate of the tree canopy in Charlotte, and challenged conclusions he had heard. Everyone turned to him as he spoke. He shared statistics, explained impacts, considered stakeholders, and offered solutions. He spoke with authority. He then sat down. I don't know if anyone applauded, but I imagine we did. I went up to him afterwards. Who was he? Where did he come from? What was he all about? At the time, I was editor of Charlotte Viewpoint, and I was alert for possible writers and contributors. We talked briefly. I don't know if we later met for coffee. It seems like we did. Within a few months, Shannon sent in a poem to Charlotte Viewpoint. In his author's note, he described himself this way. Shannon Binns has called Charlotte home since late 2007 and discovers something fantastic about the city nearly every day. He came here by way of New York City, Seattle, Senegal, Thailand, and Prague. Each day, he seeks wisdom and beauty in what he encounters and attempts to capture his discovery in photographs and words to share with others. The name of his poem was called Lucky Ones, about how fortunate we are to enjoy the privileges we have in our nation. I knew Shannon well enough at the time to know he was sleeping on his sister's couch, working remotely for a nonprofit organization out of Asheville, doing environmental advocacy work. I don't know that I knew that he was struggling with depression. What I was certain about was that he was informed and gifted and finding his way. In 2009, I was searching for a new editor for Charlotte Viewpoint. I had an instinct about Shannon. We sat on the rocking chairs on my front porch. I asked him if he might be interested in leading the team. He thought about it for a moment, then said he had an idea for an organization of his own. In 2010, Shannon launched Sustain Charlotte. I've watched his rise ever since. Shannon has built one of the most dynamic startup nonprofit organizations in the city. The work of Sustain Charlotte is prolific. Events include Grow Smart Charlotte, Biketoberfest, annual Charlotte Sustainability Awards, and a Charlotte Sustainability Summit. Programs such as Sustainable Neighborhoods and Transportation Choices Alliance, extensive public policy engagement on the completion of greenways, the rights of cyclists, and a uniform development code, and robust communication to stakeholder constituencies. Shannon does this work attracting people and support to him. His efforts are helping Charlotte become more resilient, more able to solve problems, more of a smart and green and sustainable community. However, when I think about Shannon, I think less of his professional achievements and more about his love for his wife, Crystal, and his daughter, Eadie. I think about him riding his bicycle. I think about him traveling to natural parks and to foreign lands, such as Vietnam. I think about his home that is open and welcoming and filled with food and drinks and books and photographs and paintings and joy. I think about Shannon the person, decent and hardworking and kind. When I think about Shannon, I know we are the lucky ones. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.